Good morning, everyone. Let's prepare ourselves and let's jump back into the book of Genesis. So one of the themes that we've kind of noticed is so far through Genesis, at least when it comes to Abraham, Abram, now Abraham, is both he and Sarah. You know, God keeps telling them, well, don't worry, you will have a child. It'll happen. And they're like, well, you know. So in a sense, they're kind of, whenever God shows up and does this, they're like, oh, okay. But then it's as if they don't really think it's going to happen. So they're basing what will take place more on their situation, their physical abilities, than what God says. And we will kind of even see that today. So we're starting now on chapter 18. Okay, so now things are going to get a little squirrely. Okay, because Abraham will, during this time period, he will also move. Lot's continuing to live. Well, he'll move later. Lot and his family are continuing to live in Sodom, right? And of course, at one point, Lot and his family were captured in some regional struggle. And then so Abraham, and he had 318 of his servants, which means he's quite wealthy, went and rescued Lot and his family so they wouldn't end up being exiled somewhere else. Okay? And so now we find ourselves, Abraham is just waiting for God to deliver on his promise. Okay? So chapter 18, verse 1. We'll read the first 8 verses and go from there. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre as he sat, that is, Abraham, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord. So there's something that's going on where Abraham knows God is visiting him. Okay? O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf tender and good and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and a calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So we know just by Abraham's reaction and what's going on, that these aren't just 3 visitors who happen to be passing by, right? So who are these people? Well, he uses the word Yahweh right there. And Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, and he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, behold. Okay, so Yahweh, the Lord, is mentioned, but also 3 men. So there have been various interpretations as to what's happening. So often within the church, this has been understood as 3 persons of the Trinity manifesting themselves. Okay? Though this is possible, it doesn't make as much sense based on the text that this would be God and 2 angels. Because we'll see later that 2 of them will go to Sodom and basically see what's going on there, right? And so that's kind of what makes the best sense on all the events of the text. But so the 3 figures known, as a depiction of the Trinity is more commonplace within Eastern Orthodoxy than in the West. And so you'll find pictures of 3, the 3 persons in a painting representing the Trinity, and it comes from this passage. So, okay. So okay, I guess I jumped the gun here because I said, what did God promise? Well, that'll come in the next section. So when I was putting this together, anyway, let's read the next section, and that way it'll match the question. They said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" And he, that is Abraham, said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." So the promise is being restated, isn't it? But what's different this time? Yes, this time next year. Okay? So meaning about a year from now. Okay? So, and Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Why is this? Why does the text tell us this?
Because having a baby.
Yeah. In other words, it's not going to happen. Okay? So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say?" Now, Sarah laughed to herself, so it wasn't some loud guffaw, right? She's like, huh, so this is within the tent. So it wasn't something, it wasn't as if they would have heard some loud, boisterous laughter. So the text is kind of clear on that. Sarah laughed to herself, saying. So they didn't hear that, and yet, right, the visitor knows. Okay? And of course, verse 13, the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did laugh." So, in other words, if God calls you out, right, be humble enough to say, "Okay, I messed up, Lord," right? So, because there ain't no fooling him, okay? And so Sarah, she's embarrassed that she laughed. But in a sense, it reveals where she is, right? Yeah, God has promised. Yeah. And now look, right? So based on her assessment, you notice what she says, and it gives us a clue. Okay, so let's scroll back a few verses and take a look. Okay, so this is what Sarah says in verse 12. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old." So what does she mean by being worn out? Well, okay. Right. So she's no longer having periods, if you want to be crude, right? Menopause has come and gone, and now she's, right? "And my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" My Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? What does that tell you with the dynamic between Abraham and Sarah? They're not even having sex, right? So, this is a polite way of saying that. So this right here says, so from a human perspective, you could understand why Sarah laughed. It's impossible. I can't bear children, and, hey, my husband, he's old, and it ain't happening. Okay? Well, we know that in the abstract, right?
Yeah, but she's seen him do so many things.
Jesus rose from the dead and the religious leadership, right? So we can say, well, yeah, they should have, but it's amazing what the human mind can do, right? To kind of continue to justify a particular reality we're living in, okay? So it's not surprising, okay, that this has happened, though you're right. You know, Sarah should say, well, God can do this. But I think she's been tired of waiting. But see, this is the point. God's going to cause this to happen when when there isn't any other explanation. Okay? So, all right. And so, is anything too hard for the Lord? Of course, that's said to whom concerning another birth or pregnancy? That's concerning Mary, right? So, yeah. Okay. So let's turn the page, because there's this little blurb a bit about repetition that's being used. Okay, and so earlier in the first 11 chapters, we explored bits of kind of either poetry or poetic prose in the Genesis text. Not so much after 12, because really there's a shift now. It's you know, there's very little poetry taking place. And so we really kind of haven't jumped into those sorts of things, right? But, okay. But, so in the second sentence on the top of the page, I wrote, however, in Genesis 18, 11 through 14, we see God emphasize a truth through narrative repetition. So this is something that is kind of a standard thing, especially within the Hebrew language. Some of this is born from Hebrew only, in a sense, has two tenses of verbs, and it also has a smaller vocabulary. So, words have to have a lot more semantic range than often we'll have in English. Okay, and often to clarify something may be repeated. See, to help kind of, okay, so you understand what's happening better. So it's not just a rhetorical vehicle in the Hebrew. It's also something for clarity, okay? So 2 times God brings out a point so the hearer or reader is brought into the impossibility of Abraham and Sarah having a child. He is brought into one level, disbelieving with Abraham and Sarah, okay? However, in the third sequence, God reaffirms that he is still God. So the first sequence is really the narrator. Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, with the way of a woman having ceased with Sarah. In other words, Sarah can biologically no longer have children. So the text says us apart from any quotation or something that someone says. Okay? So we're like, okay, if God is going to do this, it has to be a miracle. Otherwise, not happening. Sequence number 2. This is Sarah. Sarah laughed inwardly, saying, after being shriveled, is there to be pleasure for me? Besides, my Lord is old. When Sarah said pleasure, she used edna, which is a cognate of Eden, with connotations of life and in its completeness. So the wordplay, in a sense, is, right, so pleasure, yeah, she's referring to that, but also, I'm not going to produce a child, and another Eden is not going to come from me. There's that kind of wordplay a bit going on. So this lets us know that Sarah's doubt or disbelief is stronger than we would first think because of this wordplay. And then the third sequence. But Yahweh said to Abraham, why does Sarah laugh, saying, shall I really give birth, old as I am? Is anything beyond Yahweh? At the set time I will return to you at this very season, and Sarah will have a son. Okay, so it's going to be during the same season next year. Okay, so it's going to be more than 9 months. Okay, so if we kind of have the devious mind, well, how do we know that one of these 3 weren't like really just a dude, and right? Well, one, Sarah isn't, right? Sarah's not able, but it's more than 9 months. Okay, so both of those things let us know that this isn't because of some shenanigan taking place. Okay? Does that make sense? So, when everything in your life says no, I will make it a yes according to my promise. So, there's a repetition in each of those three sequences that let us know that they're confirmed, Sarah's confirmed in it ain't going to happen, but God is confirmed in it will. Well, we'll have to wait until next year and see what happens. That'll be next week for us. Okay? Next verses, are we ready? Let's look at 16 through 22. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them and set them on their way. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great and their sin is very grave, I will go down there to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood before the Lord. So see what's going on here? So the men, angels in human form, and Abraham is before the Lord. Okay, so we can kind of see that. And so this is, to me, what makes sense, that the three is God and two angels. And I will say the pre-incarnate Christ. Okay, he is also referred to as Yahweh. Okay, so I want us to look at verse 19, because this really kind of delves into God's mind. And why did he choose Abraham? I mean, this is really all that we know. Because when God chooses Abraham, years before now, what do we know? He's just some guy from Ur, right? And he says, go to this place, etc., etc. But we don't know what's happening with God. And 19 gives us a clue, right? So, what two reasons did God choose Abraham? For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. So what this entails is what? So from Abraham's son, right, God will have a distinct people. And so Abraham will help establish that. Okay? And so that's part one, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. See? So the Lord knows, God knows, okay, Abraham, even though he's going to mess up, he will help institutionalize what is necessary to have a people set apart through whom the promised Messiah will come. Okay, that's part one. And so, what is the second half? The way that the verse is laid out, right? So, and so the Lord will bring to Abraham what he has promised him. So the promise is linked, okay? I mean, Isaac will not be born apart from God's miracle. But the promise is also linked to what will come within the life of Abraham and Sarah and descendants. Which you think, okay, well, this is what it says. How bad would life be if it was any old Yahoo? Because when we follow the life of God's people, we're thinking, really? This is what's going to happen? It doesn't look that way to me. But think about what this implies. Is that if this didn't happen, there would be no people. It would have been lost altogether. Okay? So this is God in his providence working through events, etc., etc. But also, he knows what the descendants will be and where they will go and what the result will also become. Okay? So, that's that part. Lets us know. Let's press on if we're okay with that. Okay. 23 through 33. We're covering a lot of real estate because there's events, but there aren't a whole lot of things to get into the weeds so much. So 23 to 33. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are, okay, so we know this, right? So Abraham's bargaining with God because, right, he said, this is great evil. Okay. Now you're thinking, how has God acted so far with great evil? What's that? Harshly. But for what purpose? To ensure the promise happens. See? So he's keeping the promise alive. And so that's part of the backdrop. This isn't only a righteous God meting out vengeance or justice or wrath, but it is God ensuring, right? And so we'll kind of know this when we see how Lot's family is affected by living in Sodom, right? And so if we extrapolate from there, well, what will happen? Will Abraham and his family be so affected as well? And we would go, well, we don't know, but God knows, and I will most likely say, and I say yes, but God prevents that. Okay? So let's continue on, okay? So in other words, God isn't simply capricious. Because the promise of the Messiah must come to fruition or nothing else matters. Right? Nothing else matters. Okay? So let's continue on. Okay. So it'll happen, and so basically what ends up happening is Abraham is bargaining with God, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, and of course there aren't even 10 righteous people, and so Abraham kind of gives up. Okay, he just goes, okay. And so this is now in verse 32. This is Abraham speaking. Suppose 10 are found there. God answered, for the sake of 10 I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So if there are 10 righteous people, what does that mean? 10 people who trust in God. That's what this means. Okay? So we think, okay, well, how many are in Lot's family, and do they believe? Or are they kind of teetering on the edge? Right? So, but, so there you have it. Okay? So now we're going to press on to 19, because now we're going to see, well, what's going to happen? Well, are 10 righteous people found in Sodom? Well, we know, right? First 5 verses. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. Okay? So part of the 3, these 2 broke off, and now, right, they're at Sodom. So this just makes sense that what happened in 18 was not a manifestation of the triune God, but God and 2 angels. And to me, it just makes most sense, the pre-incarnate Christ, when you put everything together and kind of the divine appearances in the Old Testament. Okay, even though that the text doesn't clearly let us know that it's Christ, right?
So, quick question.
Yes.
Christ said to them, go back to wherever Christ is, but he didn't go and watch.
At this point, we don't know exactly what's going on. So, because it just finishes that God's visiting with Abraham, and now we don't know what God is doing. The text just says, now we know he will be involved later, but right now we can't say. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Okay, Lot saw them. He rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go your way." Okay. It sounds like he's trying to get into town and get out of town before you really notice how messed up this place is. Right? So at least he knows that this town basically lives in ways contrary to God's will. And that's why he's acting this way. They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Okay, so Sodom and later Gomorrah will be mentioned, right? So this is taking place in Sodom, and elsewhere in Scripture, we know that that this is a place infamous for injustice, disregard for the poor, but also rife with sexual sin. Okay? So when the text says that people say that we may know them, is this like, oh, well, we just want to be hospitable folks. We see you have guests, and is that what's going on? No. This is no in some other way. So these are angels who look like men, and who is surrounding the house? Men, right? Now, I'm going to say this is probably hyperbolic, but the point is made, right? In fact, it's kind of said several times, right? We can see it's emphasized. So let's take a look at this, right? So, okay. So, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. See this again, this use of repetition. So, what is this saying? Ooh, that somehow people now know, and whatever's happening, to put it crudely, hey, there's some fresh meat in town. Right? And there you have it. So, this is not looking good. Okay? So, let's see how Lot responds. Okay? So, is he going to respond in a righteous way, or is he going to respond in some other way? Let's see. Okay? Well, let's continue on verses 6 through 22. So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening here, okay? Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man." Oh, man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Wow, this guy's as wicked as a politician. "Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." So he's not saying who they are, but he's saying, come on. The standard rule of hospitality is that you don't do this sort of thing. Okay? But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge." Wow. Who are they referring to there? Lot. In other words, you moved to this town. Okay. In other words, you're not a lifelong resident. Who are you to tell us? Right? Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So these are the 2 angels, right? And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. So they're unable to kind of see what they're doing. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Son-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place." For they were about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Okay? So the men who said that are the angels, right? So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-laws who were to marry his daughters, Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy this city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting, or should we say future sons-in-law. So because his daughters, right, as Lot said, they haven't had sex, they're still virgins. So some marriages have been arranged with some townsmen, okay? But how do they respond? But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. So when it's time to get out of Dodge, right? As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment in the city. Why not the 2 future sons-in-laws? Because they thought Lot was jesting. They're not going to go, right? So they're not even mentioned. But he lingered, that is Lot. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand. Okay. The Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. Again, the repetition, right? So, escape, do not look back or stop, right? And so, escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. So, 3 times it's basically saying, flee, run, don't go back, don't look back, etc. Okay? And Lot said to them, O my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. So he's saying, let me flee to this other city. Okay? Let me escape there as a little one, and my life will be saved. He said to him, Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city to which you have spoken. We'll find out that this is Zoar, which is also kind of known for kind of these practices as well. Okay? Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. Okay? So, now on the question on page 3, okay, which is kind of in the middle, if we look at these verses, we could say, well, how is Lot living in this situation affecting him and his family? So let's look at these verses, okay, because these are a few things we want to consider. Okay, verses 7 and 8. So this is Lot speaking, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. So Lot has been living in the city. He understands kind of how everything kind of works. And he's, oh boy, this is kind of a mob rule thing going on here. And so what does he do? Should a dad be doing this sort of thing? No. He's doing this because he doesn't want the angels, he's hoping the angels don't find out what's going on. So he wants to quietly send his daughters out and then hoping this will placate the crowd and everything will be okay with the angels. That's why I said he's worse than a politician. Okay? So this is bad. Okay? He is not acting as the head of the household, the spiritual leader. Okay? He's really influenced, even though he recognizes these are angels. And he's doing stuff, but it's only appearances, nothing else. So if he has faith, it's shallow. It doesn't go deep. Okay? Verse 14. Let's see what else is happening here, okay? So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters, Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. Why would his sons-in-law think he's jesting? Because in their interaction, or future sons-in-laws, in their interaction, they've never really seen Lot in a pious, religious, or faith-filled, faithful way. And so they're like, What's with the old man? What's with him? He must be joking. Because that's the only conclusion they could think of. See, so they don't have any frame of reference. And goes, well, you know what you're saying just sounds so outlandish. Right? But see, these all give us clues as to what type of life Lot was living. Well, if that's Lot, what of his daughters? Right? Or grandchildren if he stayed in the place, etc. Let's look at verse 16. But he lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So in other words, where was Lot lingering? In Sodom. Get out of Dodge! But he's lingering. Okay? Wow. Okay. So there's another clue. And verse 20. Okay? Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. So he doesn't want to flee too far away, and he's fleeing to this small town, which is not that different from Sodom. Okay? But God allows this for Lot. We'll see that things are going to get really weird and wonky for Lot, because we're going to say, well, where does he actually end up living? And it's going to get really bizarre. Okay? So, and then the question is, if we let them, how can our friends and companions affect our fellowship with God? They can. It doesn't mean you can't have unbelievers as friends. It's just that what sets the pace for our faith life? Not our friends, but God. Okay? And that wasn't happening with Lot. So Lot was surrounded in a swamp of whatever, and it was basically changing him. It was just seeping into him and changing what he thought, how he acted, and even what he believed. Okay? And so at some point, right, if you're not strong enough to live in such a setting, you're toast. Lot was not strong enough to live in such a setting. Okay? Is there a middle ground? How can we be in the world but not of it? I think we just kind of discussed that, right? So, okay. Well, now, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's going to happen. Okay? So, verses 23 through 29. Okay? So, for me, I have to turn a page. Well, wait a minute. I missed something because no, wait a minute. I'm looking in the wrong chapter. Okay. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. You know, there's actually still kind of remains of this today. Yeah. So archaeological, you will have to let Bob give us an archaeological.
They were trying to explain it away that there's sulfur and stuff in the soil
Yeah.
near where they think these cities were. There's a lot of things in the Bible that they're looking for there.
Yeah. Usually when somebody tries to disprove something in the Old Testament, and then eventually they go, well, they end up actually proving it in some way. I mean, classical example is Jericho, right? And it never happened, and then lo and behold, they find the city's destroyed walls, etc., etc. So, okay. So the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar, and the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all in the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. Well, sulfur, yeah, okay. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. What is that? Now, why is this even mentioned? Well, yeah, I mean, but what is this? they're so attached to the city that, wow, goodbye city, right? So, in other words, what the angels tell them to do, basically, you are to outwardly repent, okay? And of course, this is to mirror an inward repentance, which Lot's wife did not have. Right? So she's pining for the city. Wow, now we have to move to a smaller city. There's no Walmart there, or whatever, right? Whatever it was called. There's no Canaanite mart there. So, okay. So, yeah. Okay. So let's press on through 29, okay? And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley. God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So God remembered Abraham and sent out Lot. This is the second time that Abraham is involved in the rescue of Lot and his family. Family's a bit smaller, right? His wife, no more. And what? 2 daughters who are unmarried. And so it's just he and his 2 daughters, and they flee to this place called Zoar. Okay? Some other things, let's look at other passages of Scripture just to give us an idea. This is from Jude 7 on the bottom of page 3. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued a natural desire, serve an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So Jude is using Sodom and Gomorrah as kind of an example. Okay? So, in other words, this is the result of what? Evil, living apart from faith. Okay? Let's look at 2 Peter. Okay? By turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going on to the ungodly. And if he rescued righteous Lot, notice he's called righteous Lot. What? That's really being generous. If he's righteous. So if Lot is righteous, why is he righteous? Yes. Not because of himself. Wow. Okay. If he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Okay, are you going to tell us the rest of the story? Okay. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials. So what does Peter use this? The Lord rescued Lot. He can rescue you too. And of course, you look at how Lot's described and go, well, wait a minute. I remember from Genesis, you're kind of really painting a pretty picture, right? Okay. But see, that kind of gives us hope, right? Because we too can mess up. And God too can rescue us. And so Lot was righteous by God's doing. So his faith was on the edge of extinction. And God rescues him. Okay? So what warning and comfort can we take from these passages? Jude says, hey, this is the bad stuff. And Peter shows, yeah, but God can rescue us as well. So we can find warning and comfort. Okay? And then from Luke 17, we see how Jesus uses this to kind of prepare us for the last day. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In other words, life on earth is going to be going on. And in fact, it'll happen, and there probably will be so few believers that, right, everything is just happening with whatever. Maybe it'll be like Lot, right, in Sodom. On that day, let the one who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take them away. And likewise, let the one who is in the field not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. So live based on where you know your true home is. Okay? All right. Are we still on the horse? Ready to press on? Okay, next chapter. So if you think it's bad now, oh man, all you have to do is say, well, are people involved? Yeah. Then you know somewhere along the way, it could always get worse. So whenever anybody says, it can't get any worse, that's not true. There's been a number of times when things have happened, well, it can't get any worse, and it does. So, because why? Sinners are in the thick of it. That in itself should prove what? Well, anyways, that we're not all we're cracked up to be. So, okay. So let's look at verse 30 in chapter 19. Now Lot went out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. Why? Sodom was just destroyed, right? And Zoar is similar. Of course, Zoar was a lot smaller, okay? But it's a little more toward the mountains, okay? So they kind of flee, right? And so where is Lot and his 2 daughters living? In the cave. Wow. Even back then, that was a hard living. Okay? So, now, think about, they escape in haste, and they go to Zoar, but it seems as if Lot goes directly to the cave. Because, see what happens next. Okay? So, verse 31. And the firstborn said, and so he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, this is the older daughter saying to the younger sister, okay? Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. So, what is the older daughter, older sister thinking? Well, what happened in Sodom, I think, has happened everywhere. So she's, whatever happened was so destructive, so cataclysmic, and they're hiding in a cave now. So they're thinking, this must have happened everywhere, because they probably just went, whoosh, right? And so, because you think, what? Where does she even come up with such a crazy, wacky thinking? But, okay, so the future sons-in-laws died. Now they're living in a cave, and the older sister thinks, well, this basically has happened everywhere. Well, I think they fled to Zoar directly to the cave, and I don't think they really saw anything. Because if, it just, right? So afraid to live in Zoar, so he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. So he goes there, but goes straight away to a cave. And the thing is, I don't think the daughters saw anything. Because whoosh, they're fleeing and they're going there and, all right, and why are we living in this cave, Dad? Right? So, and then you have to say, well, why would the older sister even think this? Right? Is she insane? Or is she basing this on what she knows has happened? See? So, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. So, because it's an emergency situation, right? Emergency situations can justify almost anything. It's an emergency situation, right? Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that he may preserve offspring from our father. This is the older sister. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Okay. Yeah. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him. And she, right? And he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. So, are these people of Israel? They are enemies of Israel. So, extrapolate this. God rescues Lot and his family. So, what becomes of their descendants? They become the enemies of Israel. So, if all of this continued, what likely would have happened? If these become the enemies of Israel, you can just say, oh, okay, so the people of God will be squashed before they really have a chance to get out of the gate. See, this kind of lets us know this. And so, to ensure the messianic promise continues, God does what's needed. Okay? And the actions of the daughters and the children, the sons they bear, and who they become, tell us all this. Why does the text include this information? So we know, oh, wow, they don't become faithful Israelites even though God rescued them. They become the enemies of Israel. Okay? So, wonky thinking, but also this lets us know, not only wonky thinking. Okay, are we ready to press on? Because they're not the only ones who are messed up.
So, yeah, because the Arabs are out there, or the almost like the wild donkey man.
Oh. Wild donkey man? Oh. Well, not yet. Ishmael. Yeah, Ishmael is right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, but not, yep. Okay, let's look at 20. We'll see how far we get there. Okay, because this is basically just going, really? Didn't something like this happen earlier? So this lets us know that Abraham is also, at times, a loser. Okay? From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. So if you look on the map, Gerar is on the, it's on the kind of the lower left-hand side. So today, I think it would be part of the Gaza Strip. So that's the folks who keep lobbing rockets into Israel all the time and that sort of thing. So, okay. And Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, She is my sister. Well, that's kind of true. She is his half-sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. I'm thinking this is probably his court. So he's the king and he is his court, and his court does whatever he does on his behalf. And I'm thinking this is actually what happens. Because when we continue with the text, we'll kind of see, okay? But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now Abimelech had not approached her. Okay, well, she is pretty old, but hello, right? So he said, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Did he not say himself to me, she is my sister? Okay. So he does know of this, but okay. And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Then God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. See, so when I put all the pieces together, he's aware of this, but I'm thinking that it's probably his court acting on his behalf. And he goes, oh yeah, king, blah, blah, yeah, sure, okay. It's this, somebody, and we brought him to the harem, and the guy says that she's his sister, and she says he's his brother, and doesn't this seem like Genesis chapter 12? Yeah. Except the slight differences here, and Abimelech actually is looked a lot more favorable than Pharaoh, right, in 12. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now then return the man's wife, for he is a prophet. So he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, and you and all yours. So Abraham is a loser, and he repeats the stupid thing that he does, but God intervenes because the promise, right? Sarah has to bear a child next year, and it has to be Abraham's son, according to what he has said. So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them these things, and the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called to Abraham and said to him, What have you done to us, and how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? Have you done to me things that ought not be done? In other words, look, I'm not even a follower of your God, and I know this is wrong. See, it's like Paul says, do not even pagans know this? Right, in Romans? Okay. Okay. Abraham said, I did it because I thought, there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother. So Abraham is also cowardly. Wow. I mean, we can really see these flaws. Okay. Okay. So when we see that Abraham becomes a man of great faith, it's not because of himself. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants and gave them to Abraham and returned Sarah his wife to him. Well, because, right? If you don't return her, you're going to die. Okay, so he goes the extra mile here. He's just to be sure. And Abimelech said, behold, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you. To Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated. Abraham's already rich. Now he's richer. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and also healed his wife and female slaves so that they bore children. Okay, so God had caused a temporary infertility to take place until, in other words, what is going on between Abraham and Sarah became real in the court of this king. For the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. We'll stop there. We'll continue next week on chapter 21, where this time next year will actually happen, and Isaac will be born. Okay? But it's kind of a long and arduous path, hasn't it? And to a large degree, it was long and arduous because of Abraham and Sarah. Okay? Let's close with prayer, and we'll make our way into the divine service. Our Father, when we look at Abraham and Lot, and we look at them, let us not be too harsh on them. We could see their faults, and yet through them you work something miraculous. Let us understand even more that despite their flaws, what you were able to work in them and through them, and also the faith that you gave that sustained Abraham all those years. Grant us such a faith. And when we mess up and are stupid and do crazy things, may you rescue us. May you keep us in your hand and keep us faithful, because we are often too much like Abraham. Keep us in your fold, not only this day, but even into eternal realms. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.